Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us here today at our virtual town hall meeting, focusing on what is next for our community. I am Dr. Cindy Banyai, congressional candidate for Florida District 19. I'm a mom and small business owner, and I'm fighting for our water, our health, and our community. And I'm so happy to be joined here today by Pastor Juan Gonzalez, who's also been a very important figure in our community, working towards inclusive community development. And now he's working to take that level of leadership up a notch by becoming a Lee County Commissioner. So thank you so much for joining us here today, Pastor Juan.
Thank you, Cindy, for inviting me to your town hall meeting. It's a pleasure. Everything is virtual. It seems like everything is on Zoom or GoToMeetings. And this is a good way to find ourselves.
Absolutely. This is the way of the world these days during the coronavirus pandemic, and we have to take care of the vulnerable population and making sure that we are still staying connected and providing leadership for our community. So thanks so much for being here. I also want to let everybody know that I have my staff, campaign coordinator, recent Florida Gulf Coast University graduate, Eddie Singer. Hi, Eddie.
Hi.
Are you there, Eddie?
I was on mute. Yeah, I was on mute. Hi, thank you.
Okay. So Eddie is going to be behind the scenes helping us to facilitate this town hall meeting. So if you do have any questions, go ahead and put them in the question box, and Eddie is going to help get that information over to us so we can continue the conversation. He's also going to be monitoring our social media on Facebook and Twitter to see if you have any questions for us there. Also, I just want to, before we do launch in with Pastor Gonzalez, I do just want to say to Eddie, that I am so very proud of you and all of our 2020 graduates in Southwest Florida and across the state of Florida and the United States. I know that this is not the graduation that you would hope for, and I know that it looked like you guys were going to be launching into the biggest, brightest economy of our time, and things changed so much. But I wanted to let you know that I'm so very proud of the work that you have done, and I just want to take a moment to celebrate you. And hope, is there anything that you want to say now in terms of like how you're feeling? What are you thinking? Are you looking at the next step? Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Well, first off, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Second off, looking forward, I want to go to grad school, get my master's and PhD, but right now, seeing the layoffs that are happening in higher education, I just saw Ohio University laid off almost all non-tenure faculty or something of the sort. They laid off a bunch of adjuncts, non-tenured, and I'm worried that this is going to keep happening. And I'm seeing a lot of current grad students and professors saying, unless you are being covered payment fully to go to grad school, especially PhD, don't go to grad school right now, because the faculty are going to be caught up, especially the tenured faculty. They're going to have to pick up workloads that went to the adjuncts and non-tenured faculty now, and they're not going to have as much time for students. So for me, I need to find a school that is not going to be suffering from such cutbacks. Whether that includes looking outside the country or not, I'm not sure yet. But as of right now, I'm trying to get my teaching English as a foreign language certification so that I can at least start teaching online, because we don't know if there's going to be a second wave of coronavirus, and am I going to want to move halfway around the world just to be stuck in quarantine for a couple months in a tiny little apartment? And to answer that, no, I do not want to do that. So it's just trying to figure out what's the next step, and try and navigate this world that we're living in, because it's crazy.
Yeah, and I want to say thank you. I love actually listening to you, because it's like, for those of you who don't know, Eddie was my student several years ago, early in his academic career in global studies, and he's taken my advice, and at the time of it, because I always tell my students, go out, go see the world, do what you need to do, and experience everything as much as you can. And I think it's a really challenging time, but I'm glad to hear that you're still focusing on it. And I will tell you that I even actually told this this cohort of students in global studies that they should consider it. Of course, once things are safe with the pandemic, but because it's very similar to what I did in 2002 and 2003. That I also graduated my undergraduate in an economic downturn, and that was the post-September 11th economic downturn. And traveling abroad was something that gave me a competitive advantage and an experience that not only shaped my life, but separates me from other people in my field. And so I was still trying to give some hope to the students that they can still pursue their dreams and those big, bad, audacious goals. It's just, we have to adapt to the time. So I appreciate you thinking about that. And I love the idea of teaching online, Eddie. So thanks for sharing your thoughts with us. And congratulations.
Thank you very much.
All right, great. Well, thanks so much. So now, without further ado, let's get into the meat of the conversation here today, and that is focusing on what's next for our community. Before we move to the what's next conversation, I do want Pastor Juan to first of all introduce himself and his work and what he's been engaged with in our community that's kind of shaped his candidacy. So Pastor Juan, tell us a little bit about yourself and your work here in Southwest Florida.
Well, I've been in Southwest Florida for over 10 years. I came from New York. I was an executive in New York working in social ministry. I've been involved in ministry for many years. I'm not a what you may call a career politician, which I'm not. I'm usually the one who gets on the politician's case. And for the last 40 years as an activist, and been involved in community development, the area of housing, economic development, spurring economic development in the various communities throughout the country. I serve as national consultant to different groups. I own my own business. Besides, I've been in the parish work for about 35 years. My heart has been in the community. All my work, and even the work that I went through school, through urban planning and then theology. I was intending to go to law school many, many moons ago, and for some reason I got turned to theology and parish work, and that excited me. And I was able to work and help many communities, especially community of diversities. I lived in Miami, New York, Ohio, Alaska. I mean, I've been all over the map, traveled all over the world. The work that I've done also it allowed me to go internationally to work with relief work, work with foundations, and work all around the world to be able to assist people who have been impoverished or trying to upgrade their economic stance. And I've been involved in raising funds for communities. And I started here in Lehigh, which I am serving presently. I have a parish, but also we started off about 2 years ago, a community development corporation called the Hive Community Development Corporation. We've been trying to spur economic development in the area. We use the CDC, which is a community development corporation, as a tool to bring in assets to the community and to be able to change the dynamics of the community. One of the things that I found that everything rises and falls on leadership. And if you don't have the right leadership to do anything in the community, things don't get done. And it's not done in the vacuum. You've got to really do strategic planning. You have to do work with communities to look at their own future and create a preferred future. And that's one of the things, and to be able to create a quality of life, whether it's water, the environment, housing. There is all spectrums of which we can work with. You know, it's just what niche do you want to work in? And I've been involved in looking at affordable or attainable housing, looking at bringing in new businesses and small businesses, particularly working with a lot of entrepreneurs who wants to maybe relocate to the community. It's not enough to have just big box stores. You also want to help the mom and pop stores who really a majority of employment is done through small businesses. And look what's happening with this pandemic. It just paralyzed our nation and even our community.
Yep, absolutely. And this is actually where you want to call me Professor, Pastor Juan and I are birds of a feather.
I taught in various capacities, so.
You're definitely a teacher. That's why it's top of mind for me. So, but Pastor Juan and I are birds of a feather around community development. And this is where, when we had actually crossed paths in our work previously, when I had been a consultant with the Community Foundation here and had been working with nonprofits across the region. And my background in community development is doing work with organizations, nonprofits, and actually helping to bridge the gap between community development and governance with local government units around the world, as well as national governments. I often summarize that as saying I've worked with more than 25 governments around the world, helping them to become more efficient and effective. And it's all around this concept of community development. How can we design government policy, government systems that really works to help people through an inclusive and participatory process, which is community development. It's working to bring everybody in. So this is where, Pastor Juan and I had this very similar background, very similar focus in our careers around bridging that gap for people. And this is why, we decided to do this today.
And it's important that the community is engaged. You can't have government from the top down. You have to be from the roots. People have to be engaged. They have to be encouraged to care for their community, whether it's voting, whether it's participating in volunteerism, or just being a good citizen. I mean, all those are ingredients of making a community become better. It's not done in a vacuum. It's not done by osmosis. It's planned out. And if you communities, I grew up in the South Bronx when I remember in my early years. I used to ask my parents why the community is the way it is, And after going to school, I've learned that communities are the way they are by design. Certain communities are the way they are by design, and if it depends on leadership, and if you don't have the right leadership, certain communities are not going to advance as one would like.
Yep. Yeah, and I love that you say that, because you're absolutely right. And a lot of my work, my research, my publications have been focused on this issue itself too, is what are the structural components that are success factors or barriers for communities. And we know that there is everything from urban planning, housing access, credit and economic access, support for small businesses, road design, walkability. All of these things are components to how communities work together. What's that?
That's including infrastructure and everything has to do with quality of life for communities. Everybody wants to be happy. Everybody wants certain communities to be progressive and moving forward. But there are certain communities that are not that way.
Right. Well, and there's that design factor. And I actually think specifically there's Pine Manor here in Lee County, Fort Myers area. It's an enclave of extreme poverty, and it's a food desert. And if you look at how it's actually designed, the structure of it tells the tale of why it is that it's so hard for people living in that area to actually get out and connect and build the capital, the social capital, what we call in my dork parlance is like bridging social capital, which means like getting resources out of your immediate neighborhood and social network. So the ability to get out. And it's because it's this tiny area, very densely populated with very, small duplexes, things like that, housing units, that is bordered by US 41, which is a very fast moving road, right? And there's very little that's over there. Yeah. And on the other side, it's bordered by Summerlin, okay, to which there is actually only one road that can access Pine Manor from Summerlin side. And on Summerlin, even though Summerlin it can have has some walking paths, there's a big drainage ditch. So the actual ability for people to walk out from Pine Manor to the Summerlin side is very limited. Not only that, with the one road access, everybody's essentially blocked into this one area. And I remember a couple of years ago reading a study that I immediately called dubious because they were looking at the economic integration of Lee County and said, oh, actually, Lee County is very economically integrated between people who are low income and people who are high income. And I said, bullshit, because Summerlin itself is a barrier. Summerlin also borders Whiskey Creek, right? Whiskey Creek being, you know, upper middle class, some $1 million homes that are, you know, with river access. But it's not only bordered by Summerlin, which, by the way, Summerlin, if you don't know, is 6 lanes across. It's a divided road, as we call it in the infrastructure component. It's like 45 miles an hour, but people are really going 60. 3 lanes this way, 3 lanes that way, divided highway. There's sidewalks on both sides, but the entire perimeter of Whiskey Creek has an 8-foot cement wall. There are no access points from Whiskey Creek onto Summerlin. So it creates this barrier, this physical barrier that keeps the wealthy and the poor separated in this town, even though if you do the economic analysis without knowing those structural barriers on the ground, it looks like we're economically integrated when we're not.
Well, we're not, exactly.
So.
Well, when it comes to communities, sometimes they can be isolated from each other and people are not integrated by way of resources and community interaction. So we tend to be labeling certain communities to be a certain way, but we need to find out before we get into a community, you know, what's going on in our communities that really are taking place. Before the pandemic, I was involved in what you call a listening campaign, and which has been part of my campaigning, as you alluded to, that I'm also running for County Commissioner District 5. And even though I am running for a particular area, voters have the opportunity to, from the whole county, vote for me as well. But in order for me to do that, I got engaged. Normally when I go into community, I don't assume. One of the worst things that you can do, whether you're a leader in a community or a politician or whatever, is to assume and pigeonhole a certain community. And in order for you to know about the community, if you really are a leader and you want to really service that community, you got to do a lot of listening. And as part of my training, you know, as a community developer, community organizer, who have gone into communities to listen to what's going on, what are some of the issues that pertain to each community. And what I've learned as I've gone to Bonita, I've gone to Sanibel, I've gone to the Heights, Harlem Heights. Every community is totally have its own DNA. They have their own fabric. And one of the things that have been slowing down because of this epidemic or this pandemic, it did not allow me the opportunity to go through a listening campaign and go into the communities to find out, you know, what are the needs, what are the concerns that are in our communities. And what happens in certain, when it comes to government, sometimes we can be so tone deaf that we begin to assume that certain things are the way they are and don't really have the best interests of communities. And certain policies are sometimes set out and that affects that community. And I've been in on the other and receiving end when certain policies are set by governmental officials, we have to deal with the after effects. And I had to deal with the after effects of certain bad policies done by certain officials because they did not listen. They did not hear the community out. And it's important that we don't sit in our ivory tower and not listen to people, because people really are the ones that we represent. And when you don't have a person representing the proper voice, it becomes tone deaf. It becomes a void. And people then get angry, get frustrated, and then they don't have access to resources that are available,
Yep.
but only for a few, those who know how to have access to it or are well connected.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I absolutely agree with the point that us as leaders and representatives of the people, our job is to listen to the people. We are servant leaders, and the only way that we can be servant leaders is to engage with people and serve back with them. The other thing I just wanted to point out, again, I just love listening to the listening tour component, because I've done that as part of my work here in Southwest Florida as well. I've done it across all of Southwest Florida, and that includes Charlotte County, Hendry County, Immokalee, Naples, all over Lee County, with various groups of people, various projects too over the past 10 years. I have worked on these types of listening tours. I call it community-based research in the areas of immigration, women's issues, and education. Those are the big areas that I yeah. And it's literally been hundreds of people across our region, hundreds and hundreds of people across our region in these different groups. And my job is the researcher and the facilitator. So I designed the research, I brought it out there and brought it together, and then wrote the reports on it. And this is where I tell the story, like I bring the reports to the leaders and they just pat me on the head and say thanks and send me on my way. It's this work that experience came from. And it's so frustrating because it is. And I actually developed a tool that walked people through a very simple set of questions to understand what people want, like what is their vision for their community, what do they want to change, who do they trust to enact these change, and then what do they want to do about it. So I don't leave them with a magic bullet that I can solve everything, but try to engage them in the process, which is the key component, like you already mentioned, of moving everything forward, is this interrelationship between the people in the community, the leaders, and then the resources, and getting all of those things together to make the change that people really want and need. So I can so appreciate that you've incorporated that into your campaign. It's so unfortunate that we don't have, we're limited in our capacity to continue that work right now. But, I love hearing about it because it's what matters. It is what really matters. And we've had this shared experience around knowing that the leaders that we have, and I will say particularly the leaders that we have in the municipal and county areas here in Southwest Florida, very few and far between have there been leaders that have wanted to engage in this work. I will tell you, as somebody who did the work as a paid consultant, somebody sent me around town, they love telling people that they were doing it. They love telling people that they're doing it. But they never wanted to do anything about what it said. And they never really wanted to truly engage people in an actual participatory process. And that, I will say, goes to both the elected officials as well as the bureaucrats, because it's really hard for a bureaucrat and a technocrat who have
it makes them work. It makes them work. They have to work.
Makes it work. Exactly. They want to do this one thing, they see that thing, and they want to do it. But if you start getting multiple voices, and then you have to plan out, because if you want the community to engage in a charrette or some other kind of participatory, and then you have to listen to them, and then you have to do it. And if they tell you something about this project that you've engaged a lot of money and time on that you don't like, now you're in trouble. And this is where both, like I said, the administrative side and the political side back away from community engagement and participatory practices, because it makes them accountable in ways they don't want to be accountable.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you brought up the whole idea of community charrette, because that was part of our process through the Community Development Corporation, is to do a community charrette in which, and I don't know if everybody knows what a community charrette is, a listening campaign, but is also a design process in which we engage the community to find out, what's going on in your community, what are the assets, and what are the things that are needed. What is the preferred future for that community, whether it's roads, whether it's better housing, whether it's economic development, bringing in new industries, you name it. That's only uncovered if we have this process called a community charrette. And I've done this all over the country. I've conducted many of these. And these are the ways in which we engage community. And then not only to have a plan, because sometimes we do a lot of research and the government says, well, we've done that research before. But what happened is like you said, they put it on the shelf and they really don't want to be engaged, because that means that they have to be finding out where the resources to implement the plan. Because how are we going to implement the plan? You see, and whose interest it is to implement that plan. And that's the challenge in terms of bringing in. I think you and I will bring into government that breath of fresh air, because we have that understanding of community development. People who actually have done the work, not someone who has been a career politician and just go into government and don't have a clue what goes on into our communities. I meet. That's why I'm running, because I'm dealing with politicians who are clueless. You talk to them about issues and they're clueless. They only deal with the matters at hand that are of their own self-interest, but not the interest of the whole.
Absolutely. And so thank you. I'm so glad I actually could like nerd out on community development stuff all day long. But I want to take a pivot here. And I want to talk a little bit about what you've seen through your recent work and through your church activities, because you've got this really rich on the ground view of what's happening across our community to people who are being affected by the coronavirus, by the shutdowns and the economic fallout from it. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've been seeing on the ground?
Well, my work is not done. It's not stuck in my home. Many people have what they call our communities. Thank God for all those first responders. I see myself one of those first responders who are engaged in their community. And what I've been able to do through the resources that we're able to organize, work with Harry Chapman and other partners, to be able to feed people who have lost their jobs, who prior to the pandemic, there was already a problem with food distribution, especially single moms. We were dealing with a lot of single moms who I engage when they come to our church to be receiving food. And I'm not one who likes to just distribute food. I rather have people to learn how to be economically self-sufficient. But the reality is that people fall through the cracks because of the fact of their living wage doesn't meet up to the reality of the economics. So many of them, they're in their shame, feeling shameful. He says you don't have to feel shame, but they feel comfortable in talking to me about the fact that they are working moms, they work in the hospitals, they're teachers. I mean, so we kind of label all the people who are poor and lazy and they got to go out and work. But the reality is that we're talking about the people who come to line up to receive resources. A majority of them are working folks who not just working poor, but people who even cannot make their ends meet because of the economics. This last week,
Can I just interject 1 second? Can I just interject one before you go on? I want to point out part of my research here over the past couple of years has been on our workforce and education here in Southwest Florida. We did some research on the living wage in our region. For our region, based on local costs, a single mom of 2 needs to make about $26 an hour to be a quote living wage. So you show me right now which jobs there were even before the coronavirus that were hiring single moms to the tune of $26 an hour.
You don't find those jobs.
Not many.
You don't find those jobs. So those individuals go out and work maybe 2 jobs, and then they line up at the end of the month or the beginning of the month that we provide food. These last few weeks, we've been seeing an increase from we were feeding an average about 150 families. Now we're up to 600 families. And we're talking about giving for each family. And you should see the cars lined up. We had to turn people away. because of the fact that they lost their jobs. So we're dealing with the reality of bad policy that goes on apart from the pandemic. You know, the pandemic only exacerbated the reality of where people are at, you know, who have to advance meet.
Yep. And part of that discussion is a piece of research that the United Way across the country puts out regularly, which is the ALICE report. That's asset limited, income constrained, and employed population. These are the folks who are, just like Pastor Juan is describing, they are one catastrophe away from, you know, the breadline, essentially. And what we see right now in this country. Right, exactly. And what we're seeing right now is all those folks who were on that precipice, it's fallen. It's been a landslide out from underneath them. So those folks are there. And I bet you, I will make this bet, and I will come back and I will do the research on it afterwards. But I will bet that if you add poverty, the number of people in poverty, plus the number of people who are the ALICE population across the country, you're going to get that total right now of people that we see who are being serviced in, you know, with food benefits, with unemployment, and with, you know, all these access to the additional services and supplementary services around the country, because it really is that big of a deal. When you are living paycheck to paycheck, like the vast majority of Americans are, you cannot go 1 week without it. You cannot make an emergency payment of any kind. You know, a couple $100, you know, $500, you know, healthcare payment will put people, you know, into the poorhouse. And so that is exactly right, Pastor Juan, is that what this pandemic has showed us is exactly the systemic issues that we had existing prior to the pandemic.
Yes, it only brought it out because of the pandemic, but in reality, it was already there. And so often, you know,
it was there.
They were touting the fact that this economy was doing well, but for who and for whom? It was not doing well for those who are working a living wage, or not not even receiving a living wage, and have to make ends meet. You know, Main Street and Wall Street are two different economies, and unfortunately, those from Main Street were not receiving the goods. You know, they weren't receiving the best of tax cuts or receiving certain resources, because the subsidies, they say, well, we're subsidizing the poor, when in actuality they're subsidizing corporate America. You know, a lot of our dollars.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that. Absolutely. Yes, we absolutely have socialism for corporations, right? And it's really disgusting. And it's somebody like you and I both have this part of our community development background as well, being in community economic development. Community economic development is always based on small businesses, cottage industry, home businesses, leveraging local assets. And if you look at the research around this around the world, these are the things that are needed to sustain people, families, communities in the long run. These big corporations, it sounds nice, right? Big fancy corporation, big fancy, you know, building, and, you know, or even, you know, like a baseball stadium, something like that, right? It sounds really good and exciting. And in the economic development world, people like to have these big wins. But the truth of the matter is that 91% of the businesses in Southwest Florida are small businesses, and not only small, but micro businesses. Less than 20 full-time employees. So these are small-scale restaurants, support businesses, you know, accounting firms, marketing firms, you know, plumbers, things like that. That's the bulk, 91% of the businesses that are there, right? And also we know that not only that they are 20 full-time employees or less, but 70% on average are sole proprietors. So these are people who are like me, who are one person shop who are running their business as a consultant or like a plumber, trying to make ends meet, trying to make income for their family. And that, by the way, goes up for African Americans. So 90% of businesses who are owned by African Americans are sole proprietorships. So that's really, when that dries up, it becomes a real big problem. The reason I focus on
some of them are not even bankable according to the criteria of society. You can get loans, you can get access to capital to make improvements and all that, and it's out of the sweat of their brow.
Right. And that's a great point too, because in order to get things like a mortgage or a loan, you have to demonstrate that you have, bill paychecks and pay stubs and stuff like that. The vast majority of small businesses don't operate that way. And so you're right, it becomes exceedingly difficult to access credit. And so that can be really detrimental to individuals. I will go on and make a broader critique though around the way that we structure and support businesses, in that it is structured around doling out super large amounts of money to big corporations and shiny dollars and tax dollars and all this stuff that is classic rent seeking, by the way. They have close relationships, lobbyists and politicians, right? And they give out those large amounts of money to spur people along. What we have almost none is supports for Main Street. Every now and then at the local level, you'll have some sort of very small scale grants or supports to help small businesses, usually only under the guise that they're going to create jobs, though, by the way, right? You have to create X amount of jobs. Not to mention the fact that it's like my job, my job, my family, but we have very little support for small businesses. We have very little support for small business development. And that is crippling to an economy overall. And it really makes communities less robust. Like I said, research bears this out around the world. This is the bread and butter of people's lives, are these small scale businesses. And it's largely ignored by policy. And it's been the bane of my existence. Going way back, by the way, I moved to Southwest Florida when the VR Labs thing came out. If anybody remembers VR Labs, $5 million of Lee County money that went to this company that was supposed to create 200 jobs or something like this, making health food drinks. Yay! Except for the fact that the company.
As well, I'm sure that they got abatements, right? Tax abatements.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so on top of that, but it was the lieutenant governor was somebody who was involved in the corporation, who had strong Republican ties here in the community. They created 0 jobs and then were sued to get the money back. It was just a complete boondoggle from start to finish. And I was sitting here choking because you could have taken 20% of that money and give it as competitive grants to small businesses, and they would still be around, and they would grow, and they would be employing people. It's just a much better investment. Mm-hmm.
And what we need to do is create a sustainable community, and there's ways of going about it. And sometimes if the government listen, but if you don't have, representatives who are listeners, because they don't have the answers, they're just representing, but that doesn't mean that they are the ones who are going to implement the policies. You see what I'm saying? It's usually the staff, and you have to work with the staff, you have to work with the community and try to bond them together, So there's 3 entities for me, is getting the public sector engaged, you have the community, as well as the nonprofits and the government working together. And sometimes it's better for them to see these communities not separated than working together. And it's best that they come together for a preferred future. And that's what I mean by a preferred future. What does the future look like? Because that's part of our topic. How does our future go about? How do we go about making the proper change? One of the resources that we are not tapping is the leadership. We're not engaged in investing in leadership, because everything rises and falls on leadership. And we have a lot of brain drain in certain our communities because there's no work, so they have to go outside of the community, go to our schools, and they end up going somewhere else. Many of our young college students. So we have to also create innovative jobs, technological jobs in our community. So that's part of our workforce development, is to make sure that many of our young people do not leave our area in order for us to build a future economy or create a better economy for our communities. So that's one of the things that I want to invest in terms of workforce development, is not only to lure businesses, but also to help the local entrepreneurs, the innovative, the potential innovators who are able to bring and create new jobs. And we have to provide them with the tools for change. And sometimes they don't have the resources.
Yeah.
Or
And I
know
love
where
that.
the assets.
I love it because this is, you're taking a systems approach too, right? And this is really, hold on, getting a little feedback here. Let me try it down there. So it's really important for us to recognize that actors do not act in a vacuum, right? It's not just big business and government. It is, like you said, big business, businesses, people, government, nonprofits, all working together. And there's a very beautiful piece on economics that I had just come across recently. And what it was saying was that the innovation, even on the highest level, and the economists went down the line, major pharmaceuticals, every company Elon Musk has ever made, they have all benefited from massive investments into research, innovation, and then they built companies around it, right? And I think that that's fantastic. That we need to think about all the components, right? And so it's not just government's job, but government plays a role in this, and we need to have that be recognized instead of demonize government too, because that's kind of where we're at, where it's like, oh, it's just the businesses. It's like, no, it's not. It's the government that keeps all the stuff around us working, and taking that systems approach is important when we think about maintaining roads, which are absolutely necessary for economic development, bridges, airports. General security is important for economic development, right?
And has to be a very integrative way of doing that.
Yeah.
No, I'm saying that
you have to
it has to be integrated all together in a plan that is implemented locally and with government. So all these partners, we need to bring them together. And who brings these entities together? That's my question. I know the answer. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. You see, it requires good leadership, people who know how to bring people together and learn to work in cooperation with one another and not separate in their own little corners. And like you said, we should not demonize certain individuals. What we should be doing is bringing people together. But people work in that kind of environment where they would rather have people be separated, not talking to each other, and buying and fighting for pennies on the dollar, where we should be working together.
Yeah. And the other component that I wanted to point out about thinking systemically is not only just thinking systemically and working collaboratively, which is what you just described, but also looking at the broader systemic issues that create things like brain drain. Because one of the things that I've noted about our donut economy, and what I mean about that is we have a lot of low-end jobs, a lot of people without education, and then we have retirees, right? And they're CEOs or whatever. We have very, very few in the middle there. We have very few mid-level professionals, or very professionals overall. That's one of the reasons why we have a hard time we have a lack of general practitioners in the medical field, is because a brand new minted medical, general practitioner has a hard time coming here because of housing and education. Because if you're a young family and you don't have a lot of wealth, you can't buy a house on the river, right? And if you're a family and you have young children, you want the children to go to a good, high quality education system. And if you're a married couple, and you have your spouse coming, you want to move into an economy where there's a place for them. And those are major gaps that we have here that are absolutely systemic and absolutely as a result of the overemphasis of policy on giving out large amounts of subsidies to big companies and not focusing on the components of what people who live here really need.
Exactly. For instance, in Lehigh Acres, we have the potential of becoming, one of the fastest growing communities in the county and even in the nation. And it's very diverse. And people are moving here because still this is an opportunity zone that provides a place where people still can live decently. However, we still don't have all the amenities, because all the amenities we have to go outside of our community to be able to receive. We don't have a good cleaners or good restaurants. We have to go outside. So what happened to all those dollars? Those dollars go outside of our community, and in order for the economy locally to be healthy, the dollars have to circulate 2 or 3 times in the hands of people. But what happens is that people who drive out of our communities, if there's no, because we're a bedroom community, we don't have all the amenities, we have to go outside. Where do you think the money is going to be left? We are enriching other communities instead of enriching our community and building a tremendous workforce. So we're trying to make that change. That's the reason, one of the reasons that I'm engaged in, to make that change and to create that shift so that we can start building and spurring economic development. Because if our community is not healthy, it's going to affect the rest of the country. You see what I'm saying? So we need to equally allow for economic development to work for everybody, so that way we can create a healthy environment for all. So
absolutely,
we want to reverse a lot of the tension between unincorporated areas that doesn't have a governance structure, to have the proper representation to bring in the resources so that we can then build the infrastructure, build the leadership, build the community out, and then we can then be able to compete in this economy, be able to progress and create a quality of life for all.
And so just before we hand it over to Eddie to give us a question here, there's one last thing that I need to just gripe about here in terms of government handouts to big businesses, and that's Hertz. Okay, Hertz moved their headquarters here, I don't know, 5 years, 7 years ago at this point. Yeah, 4 or 5 years ago, moved to Estero, got subsidies, tax debate, all this kind of stuff to do so. It was seen as a big, big win for the Economic Development Office here in Lee County, and everybody was like, yay. And it's almost very, very rarely do businesses ever move their headquarters like that. So it was like, oh, look, we're such a fantastic community. They designed their economic development strategy around being, oh, look, we're this really fantastic, beautiful place. Why don't you move your headquarters here, blah, 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 and we'll create all these jobs. Well, they are filing for bankruptcy. They hired bankruptcy attorneys on Monday of this week. And I know that they never were able to, and they were never able to fill their ranks here because of what I was just talking about, because of our donut economy. You cannot get mid-level managers or mid-level professionals to move here because they cannot afford to want to put their children in the schools here. And there's no job for their spouse if they move here and they're a married couple. So they had never been able to fill that middle part. Now they could get the call center people, they could get the desk people like all the time, because we have a large group of people who are killing themselves for these, hovering around low, minimum wage jobs. And then of course the CEO has a nice house here, and this is why he had, wanted to move here, right? And so you got your executive people who they just paid to move here and got them really nice houses. But that company had been struggling to be successful since they moved here. And now we're likely going to, They never created the jobs. They never created that amount of return. And now they're likely to go bankrupt. So all the investment that we made as a community, and these are tax dollars that went to that big multi-million-dollar corporation, down the drain, because we'll never get that money back. And how many small businesses could we have supported through this pandemic had we not been giving out that money to a big corporation, so we could have this shiny jewel, you know, for them to move here, and we could say, we could build this complete crap of a strategy for economic development in our region. So I just wanted to like complain about that. I'll let you respond to that too, in case you didn't know. But I like that news this week. I'm like, this is so bad for us. It's so bad because we are going to lose the jobs that we had if they declare bankruptcy, if they completely go away. But the amount of money that we've lost in terms of bringing that corporation here, only to have them, and they were tenuous when they moved here. So let's put it that way too. So I'm exceedingly upset with that policy decision and similar policy decisions like it. So what do you think about that kind of thing, Pastor Juan?
Well, you know, I first of all, I'm glad that industries are coming into town, but it has to be a sustainable. It's a win-win for the whole community. It has to be well planned out. One thing that we're learning through this whole process is that through the pandemic is that if you don't plan everything accordingly, and even if you have the grand scale plan, if you don't have the resources, that's where we falter as a society. And if you have bad policies, like you said, we won't know until we experiment on the idea. So we have ideas, but how do we bring it about to sustain it? And that's been a challenge for our community.
All right, Eddie, so let's get one question. We are coming at time. Apparently, Pastor Juan and I can talk about community development for hours and hours on end.
All day long. But we want to be about
because we love it.
It's not just griping, but also bringing about positive solutions. One is that you have to bring in a cooperative community to work together, leaders, you know, to bring leaders together and not be so much engaged in so much partisan nonsense, but that we work together as a whole, because we all need to benefit from this community. I think Lee County is a beautiful place to live. I think we have wonderful amenities, but it's not organized in a way that is benefiting everybody. You see, it only benefiting of you. And I think that if we begin to start building cooperation between the different sectors, between leaders, raising up leadership for the future, begin to start thinking about what is the future holds for our community. What kind of community do we want to build? We're industry, you know, a retail or a service industry. We don't manufacture anything. So how do we bring in different innovations to our communities so that it can sustain our communities? How do we work and build community centers of economic growth in our locations where people are living so that they don't have to travel so hard? So we have to look at transportation. We have to look at all factors in order to build a future community. And I think you and I bring that kind of experience into the whole.
We do. And one of my slogans is, I want to create a Southwest Florida where the sun shines on everyone.
Yes, I like that.
Yeah. All right, Eddie, let's get a question. I know Eddie is curating some questions for the audience. I think we have time for one question here, and then we'll have to call it a day. So Eddie, what question do we have? Pick the best one.
So really quick, I've been letting you two go on because you've been doing a great job, but I did want to make a comment because you kind of touched on this earlier. You two were hitting on essentially geopolitics at a micro level, which geopolitics, even on the macro level, is so often overlooked today. And you two are really hitting on it at the micro level, at looking at physical barriers to economic development. When you're talking about, oh my God, You were talking about the area
Pine
earlier,
Manor.
low income area. Pine Manor, thank you. Wow,
Pine Manor.
I've been
Mhm.
there. And I still can't remember the name. Yes, Pine Manor, thank you. So when you're talking about Pine Manor, you were talking about how there are physical barriers preventing economic development in Pine Manor, and how even when you're talking about Lehigh, people aren't able to, they have to go out of the area. So it's important that it's important that we're talking about the essentially geopolitics on the micro level as well, because that is such a barrier to people, because it's not something we usually think about. It's just, oh, there's integration. Well, there's economic integration, but if you're actually looking at the physical geography of the region, there's not integration. And I think that's something really important that more people need to talk about. And I'm so glad you two hit on that.
Yeah, we have to have a better
Well,
smart
thanks.
growth plan, a better smart growth plan.
Yep.
And I know that there are some people who are working at the university levels and things like that, but I don't think that it's being communicated throughout the community. So I think that there are some people who are working at it, but it's not being shared.
Right.
Well, it is actually, it's fully in the county commission wheelhouse, frankly. This is the comp plan. Oh, this is what should be top of mind for all county commissioners all the time when they're running, is like, we get to decide where stuff goes, how much development we have, how much water we're going to conserve, how much impact fees we're going to charge for development, where it happens. And what we've seen is a systematic erosion of it, because the people who are on the county commission are very embedded with developers who don't care where stuff goes. They are perfectly happy to put up gated community after gated community after gated community, not caring about the flooding that they create in the existing community next door, not caring about the whatever happens to the water underneath, right? And they want to get away with it with the lowest amount of impact fees, which significantly negatively impacts both the availability to create those environmental strongholds to clean the water and things like that, but also sidewalks and school improvement. Yeah, and I will say, so we did talk about Lehigh and Pine Manor, but every time you hear Pastor Juan was talking about the bedroom community, Cape Coral, same thing. Right? You can throw in Estero and Bonita Springs, same thing. They have this, they cannot have a sustained community because they don't have the amenities there. People always have to drive in and out. And there's so many negative connotations with that. From an environmental standpoint, that you have to always be driving your car, from a social standpoint, that you never actually talk to anybody because you never get out of your car and you live so far apart from everybody, to the economic component. Yeah, and your brain drain component, because your physical fitness is negatively affected because you don't have compact communities where you can walk and you can safely exercise within your community. High rates of depression, just on and on. There's so many reasons why this design, and it was absolutely a design choice when it comes to the comp plan and to the way that they plot the land. It was a design choice at the local level. And it does have a tendency to create these various kinds of, like you were talking about, geopolitical barriers for folks that make it difficult for people to move around. And one thing that I want to point out on that before I give Pastor Juan a chance to get at this question is that the other issue that's related to the driving is that folks in these bedroom communities are driving out to their jobs in other places. Those are the only places that we have affordable housing, is in some of these places that are so far apart. And so it's putting the most economically vulnerable people in the most economically vulnerable place, because again, they're on the edge, they're on the precipice, they're the Alice population. They get a flat tire, they lose their job, they're done, right? They don't have a house, they're gonna lose their house, and all of that. And because they will have to drive 45 minutes, an hour to their work outside of their sprawl infused bedroom communities. Okay, so there's my diatribe on that. Pastor Juan, do you want to have at it?
I think you describe it so well that I don't need to add two more. I don't need to add other than the fact that people have to deal with all this stress, and it becomes a very stressful kind of unspoken environment. So people end up just complaining and feeling like, they're powerless. They have no way to make that change. And I think that there is hope if we really plan it out, if we engage people, like I said, and bring in all the sectors together to have a constant, communication and allowing ourselves, especially politicians, to be held accountable.
Yep.
It's for the good of the community. It's not just for the few, but for the whole.
Absolutely.
So thank you for that question.
Yes.
Thank
All
you.
right. And so let's wrap it. So before we leave, so thank you so much for being here. Thank you for that question too, Eddie, by the way. But thanks for being here so much, Pastor Juan. If you want to just give us like a very short, where can people help you? How can they help you? What are we looking at for timelines? How can people support you to become the next Lee County Commissioner?
Well, right now, because of the pandemic, I have had the difficulty of collecting the petitions that is necessary to get on the ballot. So the alternative is to then pay the fee. I would rather be a good steward and use people's money for other things than to pay a fee to the county. So right now I'm asking people to fill out one of our petitions, and you can write to me at Pastor Juan 2020 vote2020.com. Pastor Juan vote2020.com. And if you want to help out in signing a petition, just write to me and I will send you a petition before the deadline, which is practically in a week or two from now.
Yeah. Coming up May 11th, I believe it might be Monday.
11th.
So what I did to help facilitate that process, for those of you that want to see Pastor Juan get onto the ballot, you can go to my website, sydney4swfl.com, and in our news section, there is an article about Pastor Juan where you can read about all of his fantastic experience, and there's digital copies of both the donation form for him as well as the petition. The best and quickest way would be for you to take it, add your signature, so you can either print that out, sign it, scan it, send it back to him, or if you have a signing program, something along the lines of Adobe Sign or DocuSign, HelloSign, digitally stick your signature on there, but make sure it matches what's on the voter registration. Okay, make sure it matches. And when it matches, then that will allow Pastor Juan to get onto the petition. I encourage you then to email it to him directly so he can print those out and be ready to go on Monday.
Yes, and let me make a correction. I did not include gmail.com. So Pastor Juan, vote Pastor Juan 2020, Pastor Juan vote 2020 at gmail.com. Okay? At gmail.com.
Again, and I put that in the article so they can absolutely collect all that to you and get it over to you and donate to your campaign as well. So thank you so much for being here. Of course, you can always visit me at my website. Also find me across social media at the SWFL Mom 2020. That's Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And if you want to call me, 239-351-5574. You can text me there as well. I do want to hear from people in our community. And so thank you so much for this engaging dialogue here today, Pastor Gonzalez. Thanks for your support, Eddie, and thanks to all of our audience. Yeah, absolutely, my pleasure. And thanks to our audience for joining us here today and those who are watching us in the video recording as well. Thanks so much, everybody. And make sure you register to vote August 18th. Register as a Democrat and vote for me in the primary. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Take care.